Hey, what's going on, guys? Room Gaming here, back to the video. Today's episode, we are taking a look at how to play the Shadow Priest for Season 2 of the War Within. This will also kind of work with Season 3 of the War Within. Again, this is going to be just mainly a beginner's guide, so we're not going to go too much into depth in terms of like super advanced tips, tricks, and things like that. We're just going to mainly keep this at like a beginner's level, and that's what we're going to title this video. And most videos going forward are going to be more focused around the beginner, because I think overall that's most people looking at guides on YouTube is people who have no clue how to play the spec. Now, our guides are going to be changing a little bit with the introduction of the one button rotation. We'll kind of get into that here in a bit, what that looks like for Shadow Priest. And maybe that's all that you need is that one button rotation just to play like general content. You know, you're not pushing Mythic Plus or anything. You're just questing, you know, might be doing some world quests, delves, whatever. Or maybe like really low end Mythic Plus, right? And you're just wanting something very simple to get started. So we're going to cover that, and then just some of the basic abilities, like what Shadow Priest is. Okay, let's start out with how Shadow Priest deals damage. So we have something called Insanity that we use, and that's going to be this bar here that says 0 out of 50. And as you spin certain spells, you're going to generate Insanity, and you can spin that on more of your hard-hitting spells. So if we look at something like Mind Blast here, this generates 6 Insanity. We got multiple charges of it. And then we have something called Devouring Plague here, which will use the Insanity that we generate from something like Mind Blast. So if I were to cast a Mind Blast twice at a target, our Insanity bar would fill up. And as this bar fills up, we'll use it on a Devouring Plague. So we'll talk about those spells a little bit more in depth, but that's kind of the gameplay loop that you're after, is build Insanity and spend it. Let's talk about those Insanity generators. So first one we talked about is Mind Blast. Again, generates 6 Insanity. We got 2 charges of it. You cast it, and it deals a burst of damage. So this is going to be the quickest, easiest way to generate Insanity, so we typically want to use this when it's off cooldown. Another Insanity generator that we have is our Shadow Word Pain. So it's going to apply a dot on the target. It's going to tick for damage, and it will generate Insanity as it ticks. And then we also have a Vampiric Touch up here. So this is another damage over time effect, just like Shadow Word Pain, except this one actually heals us, and it generates a little bit more Insanity, and actually does a little bit more damage as well than Shadow Word Pain. Actually, a significant amount more. Now, the cool thing about Shadow Priest is you can actually apply both of these through a spell called Shadow Crash right here. So this will also generate Insanity for us, and it will apply the Shadow Word Pain that we just talked about, and it will also apply the Vampiric Touch. So to show you what that looks like, we can go to our dummies here, and we can shoot it out. And all these targets now have both of the dots on them. So we don't have to actually come in here and manually target each one of these guys and apply both Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain. We can apply it once through Shadow Crash, and it's going to go to all the targets. Now, another thing that's really nice is Shadow Crash is on a 20-second cooldown, and these dots last for 20 seconds. So every rotation, you know, when these dots are about to fall off, you're going to be able to replenish them with another Shadow Crash. So use Shadow Crash on cooldown, going to be your highest priority. Now, another Insanity generator that we have is Mind Flay. This is going to be more of like a filler spell for us, but we will be using this whenever there's nothing else to press, essentially. And this is going to generate some Insanity for us as well. And then the final Insanity generator that I want to talk about right now is Shadow Word Death. On a 10-second cooldown, this will generate Insanity. You press it, it deals damage. It can do damage back to you as well. There's really not much to know about this spell outside of you want to press it during movement phases. It's an instant cast ability. A lot of the other spells we just talked about are not instant cast. You have to be stationary for them, so this is going to be a good spell to press if you have to move for whatever reason. Okay, so we've talked about generating Insanity. How do we spend it? So the only way that you're going to be spending Insanity essentially is through Devouring Plague. This is going to do a whole bunch of shadow damage. This is going to heal you for 30% of the damage dealt as well. And this is what we're going to be using to keep us from overcapping on Insanity. So that's one of the things you need to be paying attention to is your Insanity bar. Do not overcap on Insanity, because that's going to be wasted damage, essentially. So just make sure that if you are approaching that 100 to 150 range, go ahead and use a Devouring Plague. Free up some space, you know, free up some of your Insanity bar. Another thing I want to talk about is obviously our Shadow form, right? You're going to have an action bar, and you can go in and out of Shadow form. Make sure you're always in Shadow form. It's going to increase your damage by 10%. Yep, pretty core. You know, just in case you're a beginner and you didn't know about that. We do have a Shadow form that we're always going to be in. Okay, so just to kind of show you guys how all that kind of comes together, we can Shadow Crash to apply our dots. We can build some Insanity with our Mind Blast. We can use Mind Flay, we can use Shadow Word Death, we can keep building. And eventually, we'll get enough Insanity. So now our Devouring Plague is ready. We got 56 Insanity, and then we can cast it. You can do a whole bunch of damage to that Devouring Plague. There's a lot of other things that happen that proc there that we'll go over here in a minute, but that's kind of your sort of baseline. Okay, let's quickly talk about cooldowns now. So first one we're talking about is Halo. So this is going to generate Insanity on a 1 minute cooldown. This is going to heal allies, and it's also going to deal damage to enemies. Again, it generates Insanity, so to show you what that looks like, this Halo goes out, deals damage, and then it'll come back in kind of like a boomerang and will heal. And it'll just kind of continue to do that until it's through its cycle. Next one I want to talk about is Power Infusion. So this is the main reason you bring a priest to any sort of content is their Power Infusion buff. Now, this is going to buff a target with 20% haste for 15 seconds. That is probably the strongest spell in the game. 20% haste is going to basically give somebody essentially 20% more power. And what makes it so strong is this can be cast on 2 people at once if you are running the, where's it at? Twins of the Sun Priestess talent. So you always want to be targeting somebody else with your Power Infusion. So never target yourself, always target somebody else because you're both going to get the benefit of Power Infusion. So to show you what that looks like, I'm going to target this guy, cast Power Infusion on him. You can see that he got it and I got it as well. So we both have PI on us. Next time I'm talking about is our Shadow Fiend. So Shadow Fiend is also going to generate Insanity for us. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, and you're typically using this at the start of your opener. And Shadow Fiend is just a little pet that goes out. Send him out here. You can kind of see him. He's kind of hard to see. He's going to attack and generate Insanity for us. Right, and this is going to be good, especially when we're like a cooldown window. When we're sending a bunch of damage, we'll have Insanity to fuel our cooldown window. Next one I talk about is Vampiric Embrace, 1.5 minute cooldown. You press it, and this is going to heal your allies around you for 50% of any single target shadow spell damage that we deal. So this is one of the things I would separate like an okay Shadow Priest from a good Shadow Priest is their cooldown usage with Vampiric Embrace and how they use their utility. So this doesn't grant you any damage, but it does grant your party healing. And a lot of the times using something like this is going to be just enough to kind of get your group over the edge to keep from wiping. So long story short, you press it, damage you deal, heals. We also have, let's see, what we're going to talk about next. We have a Dispersion. This is a defensive ability that you can press. Show you what it looks like. You can turn this little egg thing, this form here, this wisp form. And you're going to take a ton of less damage. Basically like an immunity. So it's not immunity, but you know, it's very powerful. Okay, another one I'm talking about here is our Void Eruption. So this is your main cooldown. We'll talk a little bit more about how to use it later. But basically, you press it, you're going to do a whole bunch of AoE damage. And this spell is going to get replaced with something called Void Bolt. Now, this Void Bolt can be cast while we are within this Void form, which is going to last for, you know, not very long, like 15 seconds. I can't remember exactly how long the baseline of this is, but you're going to be in this form, and you can extend it through casting these Void Bolts. And that's going to be this spell here. So this is going to generate a lot of Insanity for us. So when we're in this form, you're going to be basically generating Insanity like you're on steroids, and you got to spend your Devouring Plagues very, very quickly. So it's very easy to overcap on Insanity with these Void Bolts. So just be careful and make sure you're spending them on Devouring Plagues quickly. And then last one here I'm talking about is Void Torrent. This is a 30-second cooldown, and you want to get the full channel of this off whenever you can, because it's going to generate a ton of Insanity, 24 Insanity over its duration. So it's going to kind of work very similar to Mind Flay, but just way stronger. Okay, let's talk about a couple passives really quick. We have Hallucinations, so this is going to incentivize you to use some of your utility like Power Word Shield or Dispel Magics. It's going to generate you a little bit of Insanity during combat. We have Void Bolt, which we just talked about. We have our Mastery Shadow Weaving. So our damage is going to be increased for each Shadow Word, Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Devouring Plague on the target. And then during Void Form, all targets will receive the maximum effect. So this is why it's so important to keep that Shadow Word Pain, that Vampiric Touch, those dots on your target, is because our Mastery benefits from it. And then we also have the Void Form, which is what we kind of talked about through Void Eruption. So while we're in that Void Eruption, our spell damage is going to be increased by 30%, and it's going to refresh the cooldown of Mind Blast. And then again, any of those Devouring Plagues that we cast, we can extend that duration by 2.5 seconds. So the more Insanity that we can generate, while we're in that Void Eruption sort of window, the more value we're going to get out of Void Form, the longer we make it last, the more damage we can do. You can kind of see where we're going here. Okay, so just kind of going through the talents. I'm not going to cover everything. I mean, there's way too much to cover. We've covered most things. There's a couple small things I do want to cover. Shadowy Apparitions, we didn't talk about this yet. So Mind Blast, Devouring Plague, and Void Bolt conjure shadowy apparitions that float to your target, and the critical strike increases the damage by 100%. So these shadowy apparitions, they can critical strike, and whenever we cast these specific spells, essentially these ghosts are going to go out, and they're going to do damage to your targets. Now, while we're in our rotation, we will see procs of different things. One of those procs we're going to see is called Surge of Insanity here. So we're not taking Mind Spike, so you can kind of disregard the bottom half of this, but the top half is important. So assaults a target's mind with Shadow Energy, doing a whole bunch of damage, and reduces their movement speed. It's going to generate 12 Insanity over its duration. So the Mind Flay that we talked about will actually transform in your rotation. So this spell here will transform into a more powerful spell if that procs. Sorry about that. I turned my game volume down a little bit too, so hopefully that helps with some of the background noise. Another proc that we have is something called Mind Devour. So Mind Blast has a 5% chance to make your next Devouring Plague. Costs no Insanity and deal 20% additional damage. So whenever this procs, this is another button that we want to press. So it's essentially going to be a free Devouring Plague. Now, another proc that we have is Shadowy Insight. So Shadowy Pain's periodic damage has a chance to reset the remaining cooldown on your Mind Blast and cause your next Mind Blast to be instant cast. So we can basically get free procs of, again, both our Devouring Plague, right, through Mind Devour, and then also our Mind Blast through Shadowy Insight. So just something to keep in mind. There are little icons that will pop up during rotation to show you kind of like what's procced and what hasn't. And we'll kind of take a deeper look at that here in just a second. Okay, I think that's everything I'm going to talk about. Let's quickly talk about the one-button rotation. One-button rotation is not the best thing to use. I have seen some videos about it, you know, people doing really high keys, being top damage. I don't know exactly what the direction of this button is going to be with Blizzard. I think right now it's a little bit stronger than anticipated. I would think that at some point this is going to get nerfed a little bit. There is a penalty, a GCD penalty for using this button. I don't think it's that effective, to be honest. I think ideally Blizzard thought that this would be like a 15%, 20% penalty or whatever to your overall damage. I don't think that's the case. So yeah, I don't know. We'll just have to see what they end up doing with this button in the future. I will say, though, it does a pretty good job if you're new to the class, like exactly what order you're supposed to press your buttons in. This thing seems to be honed in extremely well. I mean, if you're not familiar with how to get this on your bar, you can just come in here to your spell book, and this is going to be in the top right, and you can hover over it, and this is going to show you all the spells that go in your single button assistant. So this one button can essentially play the game for you. But again, you incur that GCD penalty, which I personally think will be increased at some point. So I wouldn't get too comfortable with this, but this is great if you're just trying to figure out the game and like how to play the spec, and you just want to do some quest or whatever, and you're not too worried about exactly how to play it. This does factor in like different target counts between 3 mobs, 4 mobs, whatever. It's very intelligent. Just take a look at what our rotation looks like with this button. So first thing it wants us to do is Shadow Crash to apply our dots. So we're going to do that. So we got dots on all of our targets. Now it wants us to Halo, do a whole bunch of AoE damage and healing to us. Mind Blast for Insanity. Now we do have some procs of our Mind Flay here, but it wants us to keep Mind Blasting, right? It wants us to continue generating that Insanity. Okay, now Mind Flay Insanity. Now we need to refresh dots with Shadow Crash. Now spin some of our Insanity with Devouring Plague, and that's kind of going to be the general loop. Right, we're prioritizing Mind Blast when we get them, Devouring Plague when we get the Insanity, and then we'll go into Void Torrent or Mind Flay Insanity if there's nothing else to press. This will also use our proc of Shadowy Apparitions. That's what that icon at the top was. Excuse me, not Shadowy Apparitions, it's Shadowy Insight. That's what this button here is. So it's very smart. It will react to procs for us whenever we need it to. Now, one thing it doesn't do, though, is, I don't know if this is a bug or what, but it's not involving our Void Eruption. So our Void Eruption is our main cooldown, so I don't know if it's a bug exactly, or maybe it's intended to do that. But when you go up here to the button single button assist, it says at the bottom, Void Eruption. So not sure why it's not included, but typically after your halo goes out, that's where you're going to want to be using Void Eruption. So let's try it again, but whenever a halo goes out, then we'll go into our Void Eruption. So a Shadow Crash, halo, now we'll go into a Void Eruption, then Shadow Fan, and then now we'll start building as much Insanity as we can and spinning it with Devouring Plague. So we're still just pressing 1 here. We have some procs that have happened. Okay, now we have our Void Torrent. We want to spin with Devouring Plague, reapply our dots. We're just trying to generate as much Insanity as we possibly can here. Void Bolt and just extend this duration of this Void form as much as we can. So we'll Mind Flay Insanity if there's nothing else to press. And yeah, that's kind of the general loop there. We didn't Power Infusion, so we would Power Infusion that as well, or Void Eruption. They're both on 2-minute cooldowns, so you want to make sure that you're pairing these two up. All right, so whenever we go into that Void Eruption, just remember to Power Infuse yourself. I did not do it there. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much going to be it for this video. Just wanted to do a little beginner's guide on how to play Shadow Priest. Again, nothing super high level. This is just using that single button assist and some of the spells that we talked about earlier, and hopefully that kind of helps take all the different aspects of Shadow Priest and kind of bring it together in one concise video. Let me know what you guys think about the format of it. If you want me to go into like the opener and the rotation into more detail, but for now, I'm just trying to keep my guides as just sort of beginner only, very beginner friendly guides, not go into too complex of a video. So yeah, we'll try this new format, see how it goes. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.